Your personal and professional identities aren't the same, but both are going to shape your success in tech. In this video, we're going to talk about how you can balance each of those and leverage them for your success in the job market.
Well, you're going to have to explain me, Courtney, because my personal and my professional identity is all intertwined into one. So where does one begin and one ends? What do you think about that?
So I think they do intertwine in a lot of areas, right? But for some people, their professional identity and their personal identity aren't working together yet. They haven't found that balance. They haven't found a way for them to mold. So you have to identify what parts of your professional identity and personal identity can work together to give you that extra edge.
Okay. So first, what part of my personal identity can I use? Do you recommend? What are some guidelines? Let's start with personal identity.
Yeah, for sure. So your personal identity is something you can think about in terms of how do you interact in social environments, right? How are you at a party? Are you someone who's going to be more of a wallflower, kind of stand on the edge and observe? Or are you someone who's going to jump right in? If you're someone who's jumping right in, you probably don't have that need to balance, right? Maybe interviews aren't intimidating to you. But if you're someone that's a little bit more reserved, you may struggle going into an interview because it feels intimidating. You're not used to being in that situation. So that's where you have to find the balance. A lot of people get anxious about interviews, and they so often will tell me, I'm a shy person. Okay, so are you a shy person or are you a reserved person? Those are two different things. Someone who is shy is hesitant, right? They're hesitating to interact. It makes them really uncomfortable. Someone who's reserved is maybe just more of an observer, and that's okay. You can actually use that to your benefit in an interview.
Okay. How about now your professional identity?
So your professional identity is who you are at work, right? So again, going back to the personal, you may not be somebody who's jumping right into the middle of the center at a party. But your professional identity, you might be the first person to take the lead on a project. So while you may not be taking that first step personally, you may be really great at initiating at work. So if that's you, you can use that to combine the reserve with the initiative and be an awesome interviewer.
Yeah. There is such a thing as TMI.
There is.
Let's go back to personal identity. When is it do you share too much? Because I've seen that.
Yes, absolutely.
Or how much of your personality do you share?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so that's where that balance comes in, right? If you're someone that's super outgoing, you want to be mindful about how much you share because we can't deny that there's bias in hiring. We don't like it, we don't want it there, but it's a reality that it's there. So you want to be careful about how much you share surrounding your hobbies, your personal life, what your home life looks like, right? But where you want to kind of overshare, if you will, is on your professional accomplishments. So just making sure that you're sticking to the topic at hand, you can still be super outgoing and approachable without going off topic.
And I think even with hobbies, it's going to be a case-by-case call.
Sure.
Because I had a coworker who's very much into Star Wars, and his cubicle was full of Star Wars, and everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You know, he brought that hobby to work, and people not only enjoyed it, and he became the talk of the office. So it's not always a bad thing.
No, it's definitely not always a bad thing. And once you're already in the job, right, you might be able to transition out of that filter a little bit more. But when you're in the interview process, you want to stick to the task at hand so you're not getting sidetracked.
Do you mention some hobbies if they ask you? Do you keep it more simple? What do you suggest?
Yeah. So if someone is asking you about hobbies in an interview, theoretically, they really shouldn't too much, because that's when it kind of crosses that line as like a potential liability. So you shouldn't run into that too much in corporate. But if you do, you want to be honest, right? You could pick a couple hobbies, maybe stick to some things that are a little more general. For me, I really enjoy reading. That may be something that I would bring up. But you can also shift the conversation a little bit. For example, in my personal time, I do things to really move the needle forward on my professional life, right? I study communications, I coach communications. So in my downtime, I enjoy learning and reading about communications. That's totally fine to share.
Yeah. So how do you maintain that boundary if they are asking, or, how do you know when it's inappropriate, the question? How do you make sure you don't get there, How do you maintain that boundary?
Sure. Yeah, so this comes up a lot in coaching. I've even had people tell me that in an interview, they've been asked specifically if they have children, because, employers are concerned about time constraints maybe around, maybe needing accommodations to pick kids up from school or things like that. And that can be tough, because it certainly catches people off guard if that's a question in an interview. But again, just kind of shifting the narrative back to the topic of conversation and saying, I really appreciate your interest, but I really want to focus on my professional skills and what's relevant to this role. Can I tell you more about what I did in, pick an experience, right? Can I tell you more about what I did on this project and how it relates to this position, and kind of just go right into it.
Yeah. And also your online presence needs to be consistent with what you're talking about here too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I have chosen to have an individual Instagram and a business Instagram, right? And it's a hard line for me. At work, I don't share my personal Instagram. And it's nothing against anybody else, right? But it's just, I like to have that separation. Not everybody wants to have that. Some people are perfectly okay with being all in on one page at 100%. And if you want to do that, you certainly can. Just be mindful that you want to stick more towards the professional side if that's the way you'd like to go about it.
Okay. So separating your personal life, sometimes you think it's because some people argue the flip side. The more they know you on a personal level, as long as you're not doing anything weird and silly, the more they can relate to you.
Sure.
What's your argument to that?
Yeah, so you can still share personal insights. If you go to my LinkedIn page, you'll see I use a storytelling method. A lot of my posts are about experiences, life transitions, all things that may impact my professional presence or experiences, even how I show up at work, and not necessarily for the worst, right? You may move and experience a new culture, and that could really contribute to how you are, effective in leadership. So I think that there is a balance, but I also think it's important to remember, like you said, as long as you're not doing anything weird or silly. Everybody has kind of a different definition of what is weird and silly. So sticking to, maybe an overview or a very specific personal experience can be helpful, so that it is a more narrowed conversation and it's more straight to the point, right? Where it's not opening up for all these other questions or, topics.
Yeah, in my case, I agree, because it's a continuous evolution. My career is growing. I have other companies I'm involved with. My personal life is changing. I'm moving. So all that needs to also be reflected in how you present yourself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of that is part of personal growth, and we can't deny that personal growth contributes to professional growth if you're doing it in a true growth fashion, right? And so I think there's also a relatability to realness. And I even reflect on this in leadership. If I'm having a bad day, I tell my team, I'm having a bad day, guys. It's not going great, because we're human. We all have bad days. So again, I think it's okay to post about those specific experiences. You can kind of intertwine them in a more general professional post.
Okay. So what's your advice to our community about how to, go about understanding the balance, really?
So I think you need to identify what in your personal life is contributing to your professional and what's maybe holding you back. If you feel like you are truly a shy person and not just reserved, you may need to go outside of your comfort zone a little bit, practice those communication skills, do more mock interviews, take some time to reflect. And being shy isn't a bad thing. You can incorporate things outside of just verbal communication to get the message across that you are open to being coached, to getting a job, that you are interested. Things like talking with your hands, smiling throughout an interview, or even just straight up saying to somebody, hey, I'm really interested in this role, right? You can still be shy and get the point across, but you want to identify what parts are working for you, what parts are working against you, and how can you compensate in those different ways. You can be shy in your personal life and super outgoing in your professional.